The morning of my husband's memorial, I woke up at 5. Not because I'd set an alarm. I hadn't slept much anyway. I lay there in the dark listening to the house. The way it breathed differently now. Quieter. Like it already knew. I made coffee. Stood at the kitchen window in my robe and watched the neighbor's porch light flicker on across the street. 6:15. I had 4 hours before I needed to be at the funeral home. I thought about calling my son. I thought about calling my son. I thought about it the way you think about something you already know the answer to. I didn't call. His name was Clifford. 51 years of marriage. He liked his coffee with 2 sugars, hated mornings but was always up by 7, and had a habit of leaving his reading glasses in every room of the house except the one he needed them in. We had a running joke about it. I'd find a pair on the bathroom counter and just leave them there, and eventually he'd wander in, look relieved, and carry them off somewhere else entirely. After he passed, I found 7 pairs in 7 different rooms. I left them all where they were for 3 months. I couldn't bring myself to collect them. Clifford was a quiet man. Not cold, just contained. He expressed love through doing. He'd rotate the tires on my car without mentioning it. He'd notice when I was low on the particular tea I liked and come home with 2 boxes. He wasn't one for speeches, but he remembered everything. Our anniversary, yes, but also smaller things. The date I got my teaching certificate, the anniversary of my mother's passing. He'd just set a cup of tea in front of me on those days and rest his hand on my shoulder. We had 2 children, a son. He's in his mid-40s now, lives about 3 hours away with his wife and their 2 boys. And a daughter, younger, lives even closer, maybe 40 minutes from the house Clifford and I shared for 32 years. I need to tell you about the weeks before the service, not to explain myself, just because you need to understand what I understood by the time I was standing in that room alone. Clifford had been sick for a while, not dramatically, no sudden diagnosis, no hospital rush. His heart had been failing slowly, the way a tide pulls back from the shore so gradually you don't notice until you're standing somewhere completely different. The doctors gave us a window of several months, and then the window shrank, and then one Tuesday morning in October, he was gone. I called my son first. He said he was so sorry. He asked about the arrangements in the same breath, the kind of question that tells you where a person's mind goes first. He said he'd check his schedule. Those were his words. Check his schedule. I called my daughter second. She cried, which I appreciated. She said she'd be there no matter what. She said, "Mom, obviously I'll be there." She used the word obviously like it was armor against any doubt. I believed her. I want to be honest about that. I believed her completely. We set the service for a Saturday, 3 weeks out. Clifford had no preference. He'd actually told me once, years ago, "Don't make a fuss. Just do whatever's easiest for the people who have to deal with it." That was so like him. Even in dying, he was thinking about other people's convenience. I handled everything myself. The funeral home, the arrangements, the small reception I'd planned at the house after. I ordered flowers. Just white chrysanthemums, nothing extravagant. I wrote the obituary. I found a photo of him from maybe 15 years ago, standing in the backyard in his old blue sweater, squinting into the sun and half smiling. It was the most him photograph I'd ever seen. 2 weeks before the service, my son called to tell me he couldn't come. His older boy had a travel soccer tournament. Out of state. They'd registered months ago, paid the fees, and apparently it wasn't something they could back out of without losing a significant deposit. He said he felt terrible. He said Clifford would understand. I said, "He might. I'm not sure I do." There was a silence on the line. He said he'd try to arrange a separate visit, maybe the following month, to see me and pay his respects properly. He said properly. Like there was a second proper way to say goodbye to your father. I didn't argue with him. I've never been a person who argues. I just said I understood and we hung up. My daughter called 4 days before the service. She had been planning a birthday trip with her husband and another couple, some destination thing, a rented house on the coast, reservations that were also non-refundable, also apparently immovable. She had apparently forgotten when she booked it to look at the date I'd told her. Or she'd looked and thought she could manage both. Or she'd thought something else entirely. I don't know. She cried again on the phone. She said she was devastated. She said, "You know I love Daddy." I said, "I know. You're not angry." I thought about it. "I'm not angry," I said. And I wasn't. Anger felt too hot, too present. What I felt was something colder and heavier. Like the moment you finally put down something you've been carrying for a very long time and realize your arms have just been numb all along. She offered to come the weekend after. She offered to help me go through his things. I told her I'd be in touch. The morning of the service, I dressed carefully. I had a dark navy dress I'd bought for a friend's funeral 2 years before. I wore the small pearl earrings Clifford had given me on our 25th anniversary. I put on lipstick, which I almost never do anymore because Clifford always liked it when I wore lipstick. It seemed like the right thing to do. There was no one at the funeral home when I arrived. I mean, there was staff. And the pastor we'd used for years, who was kind and knew Clifford by name. But the pews, if you can call them that, it was a small chapel, a room really, were empty. 7 rows of padded chairs and not one person sitting in them except me. The pastor asked if we should wait. I said no. I told him Clifford wouldn't want us to wait. He spoke for about 15 minutes. He said the things pastors say, and he said them well, and he knew enough specific things about Clifford, his woodworking, his fondness for old movies, the way he'd always held the door, that it didn't feel empty. But I was aware the entire time of the chairs behind me. All those empty chairs. I didn't turn around. I just sat with my hands folded and listened and thought about the blue sweater in the photograph. Afterward, in the parking lot, the pastor put his hand on my shoulder, the way Clifford used to, and said he was a good man, he knew he was loved. I said I hope so. I drove home alone. I made myself a sandwich I didn't eat. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I want to be clear about something. I did not spend that afternoon drowning in grief. I had been grieving for months already, long before that Tuesday in October. What I felt that afternoon was something else. It was a kind of clarity. The specific, sharp clarity you get when something confirms what you already knew but hadn't fully let yourself believe. I thought about a conversation I'd had with Clifford, maybe 2 years before, on a Sunday evening when we were sitting on the back porch, and he was quiet in that particular way of his that meant something was bothering him. I asked him what he was thinking about. He said, "I think we made ourselves too available." I asked him what he meant. He said, "I think they never had to choose us. We were always just there." I hadn't fully understood it then. I understood it now. 6 days after the service, my son called. He was cheerful, in the careful way people are cheerful when they're trying to seem normal. He said the tournament had gone well. He asked how I was doing. Then he mentioned, fairly casually, that he and his wife had been talking about the house. I asked what specifically about the house. He said they'd been wondering about my plans, whether I'd thought about downsizing. And if I did decide to sell, whether the proceeds would be, he paused, available, or whether there were specific arrangements Clifford had made. I said I hadn't thought that far ahead. He said, of course, take your time, no rush. I thought about that word, rush. From the person who'd rushed through his father's death like it was a scheduling conflict. My daughter called a few days after that. Her trip, she said, had been wonderful. She was sorry again about the timing. Then she mentioned, also casually, that she and her husband had been looking at a new house and were wondering if I might be in a position to help them with the down payment. She said she hated to ask at a time like this. She said she hated to, and then she asked anyway. I told her I needed some time to look at my finances. After I hung up, I sat in Clifford's armchair, the big one in the corner of the living room that I'd never liked because it was ugly, and he'd loved it precisely because it was ugly, and he'd loved it precisely because it was ugly and comfortable. And I thought about those glasses, the reading glasses in 7 rooms. I'd finally collected them a few weeks after he passed. Put them all in a little bowl on the kitchen counter. 7 pairs, because he kept losing them, and I kept finding replacements. And he'd keep losing those too, and I'd find more. It had seemed like a small, slightly exasperating joke between us for years. But looking at that bowl, I understood it differently. He hadn't been careless. He'd been making sure there was always a pair close to wherever I might need one. He'd been providing, quietly, in every room, without saying a word about it. I missed him in a way that had no bottom. And I made a decision. I'd been helping my children financially for years. Not dramatically, not in ways that left me depleted, but steadily, in the background. A loan here, a gift there, a cosign when my son needed it, a don't worry about paying that back that I said and meant, and they accepted. Clifford had never complained about it, but I remembered what he'd said on the porch. We made ourselves too available. I had a meeting scheduled with our estate attorney, a woman named, well, I'll call her my attorney, a sharp, practical woman I'd worked with for years. We'd been planning to meet anyway to review the documents after Clifford's passing. I went in on a Thursday morning with a list. We sat across from each other and I told her what I had in mind. She didn't blink. She'd been doing this long enough to have heard everything. She just nodded, made her notes, asked her clarifying questions. What I wanted was not complicated, but it was specific. The house and what remained of the estate would not go to my son or my daughter. There was a young woman I want to tell you about. She's the daughter of a friend of mine who passed about 4 years ago. My friend and I had taught at the same school for over a decade, and when she got sick, I'd helped where I could. Meals, drives to appointments, sitting with her in the evenings when she was too tired to do much but too alert to be alone. Her daughter, I'll call her by her first name, Josephine Jo, had been just starting college at the time. She'd since graduated, was working and living nearby, and had, without being asked, continued to check in on me. Not in a performative way. Not in a way that felt like obligation. She'd just show up with something from the farmer's market sometimes. She'd send a text after a hard-weather day to ask if my pipes were okay. When Clifford got sick, she'd brought soup twice and asked once if I needed help with paperwork. She'd known not to push. Jo was not my blood. She had no claim on anything of mine. I left her everything. Not everything. I'm not so far gone as all that. I left my son and daughter modest, specific bequests, a piece of furniture each, and a letter. But the house, the savings, the cabin Clifford had kept up north, all of it went into a trust in Josephine's name. My attorney asked, gently, whether I'd like to inform my children in advance. I said no. She asked if I was certain. I told her about the empty chairs. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, all right, let me draw this up. I drove home with the windows down even though it was cold. There's a stretch of county road between town and our neighborhood, lined on one side with old oak trees. And in November, those trees are something to see, stripped bare, all gray and black against the white sky. I've always loved that drive, but I couldn't have told you why until that day. It's the clarity, I think, when things have been stripped down to exactly what they are. I'm not a vindictive person. I want to say that plainly. I didn't change my will in anger. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was doing something I should have done years ago, stopped making myself so available that the people I loved never had to ask themselves what I was actually worth to them. My son found out about a month later, after I'd arranged to have a copy of the trust document sent to both of them by the attorney. He called me, and for the first time in possibly years, his voice was completely unguarded. He wasn't cheerful. He wasn't careful. He said, "Mom, I don't understand." I told him it was straightforward. He said, we thought. I know what you thought, I said. Not harshly, just simply. He came to see me. That was unexpected. He drove the 3 hours and arrived on a Sunday morning and stood in my kitchen, and he looked, honestly, like a boy again in a way that made me ache. He asked what he'd done wrong. I told him he hadn't done one big wrong thing. I told him love isn't a bank account where one big deposit makes up for a running negative balance. I told him the chairs had been empty. He didn't have an answer for that. My daughter called but didn't come. She wrote me a long email I read once and set aside. In it, she said many things, some of which were unfair and some of which were, I'll admit, fair. She said I'd never told her what I needed. That's probably true. I'd been raised not to ask for things, and I'd raised her in the shadow of that same silence. And I can own my part in that, but there's a kind of knowing that doesn't require asking. When your father dies, you come. You come if you can. You find a way. That's not a complicated instruction. Jo came to see me the week after the attorney's letters went out. She'd received hers, a different letter outlining the trust, and she sat at my kitchen table looking genuinely uncomfortable. You don't have to do this, she said. I've already done it, I told her. I just want to be clear that I wasn't Jo. I said, I know. That's exactly why. She was quiet a moment. Then she said, your husband was kind to my mother. I told her I knew that too. Clifford had been the one who'd called her mother's house every Sunday for the last 2 months of her life, just to check in. He'd never mentioned it to me. I found out from Jo after the fact, and it had been so profoundly him that I'd had to sit down when she told me. We had tea, and she stayed for a while, and we talked about her job, her apartment, a class she was thinking of taking. The ordinary moving forward things that life is actually made of. When she left, she hugged me in the doorway, and I stood there after she drove away and looked up at the sky, that same white November sky, and thought about what Clifford might have made of all of it. I think he would have said, quietly, without fanfare, good. The house feels different now. Or maybe I feel different in the house. I still find myself starting to call out to him sometimes. Old habit, 51 years of it, and I still haven't moved the bowl of reading glasses from the kitchen counter. I'm not ready for that yet, and I don't see why I should rush. My son called again last month. The conversation was different from before. Less practiced. He asked how I was sleeping. He asked about the oak trees on the county road, whether they'd iced over in the last storm. He remembered I'd mentioned them once, years ago, and he'd filed it away somewhere. Maybe there's more of Clifford in him than I've been giving him credit for. Maybe it just needed something to knock it loose. I don't know what's ahead. I'm 68 years old, and I live in the house where I've lived for 32 years, and every room still has something of him in it. I'm not lonely in the way people assume. I have my mornings. I have Jo, who comes by more than she needs to. I have the county road and those stripped winter trees. Someone asked me once, after word got around, whether I felt guilty, whether I thought I'd been too hard on them. I thought about it honestly. The way Clifford would have wanted me to. No defensiveness, no rushing to a conclusion. Then I sat in a room full of empty chairs and said goodbye to the man I'd shared my life with, and I did it with dignity. Because that's what he deserved. Everything else is just paperwork. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened in that chapel. Not the surface of it, not the empty chairs or the quiet drive home, but the deeper mechanics of how a family arrives at a place like that. And the more I sit with it, the more I think it didn't happen suddenly. It happened the way water wears through stone, slowly, consistently, over years of small choices that nobody named out loud. My children didn't become who they were on the day of Clifford's memorial. They'd been practicing for a long time, and I'd been practicing something too, this particular form of self-erasure that I dressed up as patience, as generosity, as not wanting to be a burden. I told myself I was being a good mother. What I was actually doing was teaching them that I didn't require anything in return. You can't spend decades showing people that your needs don't matter and then be surprised when they believe you. That's not blame. That's just how it works. What we consistently demonstrate, other people consistently learn. Clifford understood something I took too long to understand. He said it plainly that evening on the porch. We made ourselves too available. He wasn't bitter about it. He was just being honest about a pattern he could see more clearly than I could. I think he'd been watching it for years and hadn't known quite how to say it. And that night, the words finally came. I wish I'd heard them better when he said them. I heard them fully only after he was gone. What I did with the will was not a punishment. I want to be careful about that because it matters. I wasn't settling a score. I was finally being honest about what I valued and who had shown up, not in grand gestures, not in declarations, but in the ordinary, unglamorous, unremarkable ways that actually constitute a life shared with another person. Jo brought soup. She sent a text about the pipes. She sat with my friend in the evenings when my friend was too tired to be alone. Nobody asked her to. Nobody was keeping track. She just did it because that's who she is. That's the thing about character. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps showing up in small rooms when nobody is watching. I think about my son coming to see me, standing in my kitchen looking like a boy again, asking what he'd done wrong. And I didn't have a single dramatic answer for him because there wasn't one. It was 100 small absences accumulated over time. That's the part that's hard to explain and harder to hear. There was no one moment to point to. Just the steady, quiet accumulation of choosing other things. I'm not done with my children. I don't think in those terms. But I'm done pretending that love without presence is the same as love. I'm done accepting the idea that being a mother means I forfeit the right to be treated like someone worth showing up for. Clifford showed up. Every day for 51 years, in ways large and small, he showed up. The reading glasses in every room. The Sunday calls nobody knew about. The hand on my shoulder on the hard days. That's what I'm measuring everything against now. Not anger, not hurt. Just that.